Well, good morning. It's Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer at the end of this hour than you are at the beginning of this hour. Today, let's talk about socialism. Socialism, it's that big word. You can see my hat today. It's going to tell you where I'm going to land on the issue. Just let me give a quick kind of story that illustrates how much I've forgotten about the fact that socialism has roots within some of our protest movements, within some of our Black Power and Black nationalist movements. A couple of years ago, a friend asked me, an ally asked me, what would be a good book for me to read to get some sort of grounding or orientation in the movement. And I suggested Revolutionary Suicide by Huey Newton. It was a book I hadn't read in a long time, but had a big impact on my life when I read it the first time and the second time, went back to it a few times. But, I'm older. It's been a while since I had read it. So I suggested that book to the person. He read it. He came back to me and said, yeah, it's some really great stuff in there. It was really interesting. But it made me remember how much that era was enamored with China and with Mao stuff and with blah, blah. And, I didn't even think about it. It hit me. Oh, wow. Yeah, I forgot about that strain of the story. That's a part of the story. We just don't talk about it as much because the Black capitalist won over time. When you think about our national movements, I'm going to bring in some heavy hitters today so that we can talk about this. Let's talk about socialists. Black people. We're not socialists, are we? Good morning, listeners, watchers, Black people. Are we socialists? My heavy hitters today. Ismael Jimenez. Good morning, brother. How you doing? Am I saying your name the right way?
Jimenez.
All right. Yeah. See, I'm trying to Hispanicify your name.
Oh yeah, no, I don't speak Spanish. I don't. Yeah. Folks too. So.
All right. So Ismael Jimenez and Sharif El Mekki. Good morning, y'all. How are you doing?
Morning. Good to see you. Good to have our bro on.
Yeah, I mean, your network is nothing to joke with, Sharif. I mean, your Philly network for sure is nothing to joke with. But listen, I'm not trying to move to Philly.
We know the Warriors.
Well, this is true. I'm not coming to Philly though. It'd be too much work. Y'all got too much people doing too much stuff there. So you heard the opening on this, right? You heard the opening.
Yeah.
Which is, my loose fitting way of saying we've forgotten a little bit of the history, but in the Black Panther movement, some would say that the 12-point program is a socialist program. Socialism does show up in a lot of the Black Panther kind of literature, over time. So does Black capitalism. They did make a statement at some point saying, basically, we're not any one thing. We're for liberation, period. But brothers, I'm gonna throw it out to you. You can see where I'm coming from this morning. Anyways, I had to go find my hat.
The fact that you have a hat that for all these different messages just hilarious.
Well, first of all,
I'm like, I'll say something. He's like, I got a hat for that. Like I got a hat for that. I got a shirt. Bro, I got a hat for that.
When you're bald, you got, oh yeah, I like, see now, my man's got the real hat.
Yeah.
But when you're bald and you don't have no hair, I bet you do have a hat for that, for almost anything, any message. You can also see my shirt, my other message for today,
Listen, I love that. My son put me down with that. I had not watched it. I watched that as a 48-year-old, just a couple years ago. He's like, you never saw that? I was like, no, I don't watch cartoons, man. I'm a girl. He's like, no, you gotta watch it, so
it's made for you. What are you talking about?
I know. Once I saw it, I'm like, oh, it's not, this is my now 21-year-old. I'm like, oh, now I see why you were loving this, but I never.
Well, hands down, the funniest show I've ever seen, probably. Hands down, the most relational show to me.
Yeah.
Boondocks, people go watch it.
Now I would read the comics like in the paper, but I didn't know it was a whole cartoon. So
apparently it's coming back. So
so
let's jump in, folks. Tell me what I need to know about this. Like, are we socialist? Is it just part of our history? Is it part of our legacy? Is it still part of our today? Are we rocking with the socialists? Is Africa socialist? is pre-colonial Africa, could we consider that to be socialism, the way that they practice or whatnot? Help me understand this, because I do not. It's a Denzel Washington type of thing. Explain it to me like I'm in an 8th grader, you know.
Well, look, I'm gonna let the scholar here, Jimenez, go. First. He's out there writing curriculum for the entire, city of Philadelphia and beyond. So this is, I think, really important.
Yeah, definitely. And first, I got to say that when we think of socialism, that's a Eurocentric frame, right? So Marx, was a European, and it was developed with this kind of like historical materialism that was based on European history, right? And even the frames of reference that Europeans give themselves. So like when we talk about socialism, like for me, that's where the first thing hits the ground running. So when we talk about, pre-colonial Africa or Africa before the European, Africa had what we would call like socialist tendencies based on that European model. But I would say the European model is a derivative of a derivative that used to be known as the truth. And when I say a derivative that used to be known as the truth, that the socialist model that Marx developed was kind of like a mechanicist way of applying, like a very Eurocentric dominant view type of way of looking at the world and how the world operates. It takes the spiritual circular understanding of indigenous groups and of Africans and turns it into this linear type of like natural progression of human societies based on a historical model that actually only existed in human history for a short amount of time. And that's Europe, right? Because Africans were theorizing about political systems before Europeans had windows or shoes. So we got to be clear about that, right? So when we fast forward today and we're asking like, are Black people socialist because all the intertwining of socialism, I would argue that socialism always offered as an alternative of the system Black folks found themselves underneath the American system. So whenever there is wiggle room to ally yourself with your enemy's enemy, I'll shoot. Last time I checked the Art of War, like folks are told to do that, right? When we're trying to survive, we'll find out those crawl spaces and manipulate them to the best of our ability and actually leverage that to our benefit. Now, would I say that folks throughout time were naive about kind of what role outsiders can play in the role of Black and African liberation? Yes. And a lot of African leaders during the anti-colonial struggles realized that. But then at the same time, when we're talking about like the socialist struggle in Angola against the Portuguese, right? They called themselves socialists. There was an alternative socialist group funded by the American CIA to undermine that socialist group. So even when we're talking about these, like what's socialist and what's not, I think nowadays it's just very confusing for most folks, right? And even operating within a global structure that is based on the exploitation, right? It's hard to even develop any alternative system besides the current capitalistic exploitative system. So I don't know if that answered your question specifically, but I like to draw out that larger picture about what socialism is.
That well did answer my question. I mean, damn.
And then some, right?
Mic drop. We done for today. His brother said before they had windows or shoes in Europe. I mean, somebody put in the comments, did we have a definition? Did I miss the definition of socialism? So forgive me for not starting with the definition of socialism, because my definition of socialism is I earn it and you take it, and then give it to other people. But anyways, so socialism, the dictionary definition is socialism, a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Which is basically like, I'm the dad of this family. I get paid on Friday. I come home and all my kids and my wife get together and they say, all right, Dad, give us our money. This is what we gonna do. Together, we're gonna make a decision. And I'm like, last time, it's like Richard Pryor said years ago when his wife was suing him for half his stuff. He said, you ain't told ne'er a joke ever, right? That's socialism to me. But anyways, that's a dictionary definition. Does that fall short of a real definition that we should be using for operations? I'm saying, let me say that differently. That's the dictionary definition. Is there a spin or another way that we should say it's particular to our interest as a community that's any different than that particular definition?
Well, I just want to parse out the idea that when we talk about socialism and when we talk about communism, communism is a particular form of socialism.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So just parsing that, just making sure folks aren't conflating the two together, I think is very important. And even just when we talk about the different iterations of socialism, it differs in different places when different people kind of implement what it means to them. Right. So when we talk about those different systems, that's it. There's different theories about how socialism should be implemented, whether it should be controlled by the state or there should be like community, like co-op control of businesses and everything. But mostly communism is associated with socialism, and that is state controls the means of production and exchange. And the folks work for this, state basically, and the state distributes the
everything
resources.
owned by the state in communism, and socialism is supposedly owned by the people or the community, right? And so I think you raise, great points, because I think, one thing, when people are like being choked out to death, right? Like you're grasping for anything you can put your hands on. I think sometimes when I look at, the Panthers and other folks, and, they would tell the stories like, hey, here was our political educational component. Here's what we read. Like they would read Mao's stuff. Like there was what was it, the red book or the blue or some book, right? Like they would read that. That was part of the reading for the political education piece. And I do think like sometimes people are like, as you're struggling, you're looking for, as Jimenez said, like an alternate, like what's opposed to this. And so sometimes people would set it up as a dichotomy. You have capitalism, and then you have communism or socialism or whatever on this other side. And it really doesn't play out that way. Another piece that was raised was that it looks so different than in all types of places. And I think when people hear community or co-op, like it piques their interest. Like, hey, well, that's very different than what's happening now. Like, oh, we have a say. Like, oh, I have a say. Like where my taxes go. Like maybe I don't want it to go to that percentage to go to NASA, or I don't want that percentage to go to the military. Military is half our budget as a country. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not down with that. So then you may look at another view. But I think what people were really searching for was, how do we, speak for ourselves, define ourselves, and govern ourselves, but trying to apply a different framework, Marxism and so forth on that, you're going to run out of wiggle room in space. You're going to find it constricting. And I think that's why you see folks, move out of there. Then you have other folks like Bernie, like, hey, people like vote for Bernie because he's a what do you call himself? Not a socialist, democratic socialist.
Yeah.
Right. Not a socialist Democrat, but like a democratic socialist, and what that means. And then other people look at socialism like, well, the countries that say they practice a form of socialism, they got free healthcare. Like, I wonder how that would. Oh, they got better educational funding and framework. Maybe, so they're looking at those type of things. Like, oh, the level of poverty is way lower than what's in America, which is America, they export, bombs and systems, right? Like this so-called democratic system where the poverty rate is like almost like, how are you rich with this level of poverty? So yeah, all of this is I think language and framing, and we still have to come up with how we want to do this work. But we're grasping, we're grasping and trying to get anything for these jokers to get off our necks.
Yeah, I think the people that you mentioned, Bernie. So this is probably the most modern injection of the socialist argument into our popular discourse and culture. So with Bernie, probably an entire generation of young Black activists or young Black people were introduced in a very mainstream political way, the idea of what socialism is and what it can mean for us. I think the problem with that is the translation of what it is and what it can mean for us in this day, in this time, in this society that is actually a capitalist society and a democratic republic that has very strong corporations and corporate control over the political process. Is whatever you call socialism would be a bastardization of socialism. So we shouldn't act like these terms are solid, for one. And you know, I make fun of people, just be very honest with you. I make fun of people who walk around with $1,200 iPhones sitting in Starbucks drinking 1,000% markup on a cup of coffee, typing out things about socialism on their on their lunch break, which is 4 hours long. So like, like we are like, if we don't start from the fact that we are a decadent, privileged country where people try on these politics like designer politics, like I'm going to wear some socialism this week, I'm going to wear some communism this week, or I'm going to wear some black power this week or whatnot. It's all we're postmodern at this point. So any of these terms don't mean much. I do want to say this though. I have a fundamental problem with a couple of things that will never make me a socialist or make me think of it as anything other than a threat. The first one is I will never trust the state. And socialism requires you trust the state to have your best interest in mind. The same state, Sharif, you've heard me say this on this show a million times, the same state that is killing your ass in the street for selling cigarettes or CDs in front of a store, that's not a police officer killing you. That's the state killing you in a very systemic way. The same state that when you sneeze or cough, they throw the book at you and put you before a judge who gives you way longer sentences than anybody else in the entire country. These fools can have 1 million moron march on the Capitol and take it over and have people doing things like turning one of them over to her mother. And she's 21 years old. She's a grown ass person. And they let her go and returned her over to her mother pending litigation, while that same state throws the book at us for selling CDs. That's an executable offense, selling CDs or cigarettes in front of a store, right? And then giving you longer sentences, incarcerating you to death, doing really wild military things around the world, taking your tax money and dropping bombs on people that have nothing to do with you and have no problem with you. This is the state that you think should be in control of your life and your money in so many ways, your education, your health, blah, blah, blah. It's a bad premise for me. Doesn't work at all for me. It's not to say that any other system, I think Brother Ismail made it very clear, no system probably in the global context is the saving grace. You can't pick one and just be like, I'm going to roll with this one forever. But do y'all get why I particularly don't like the idea of socialism just because of the state problem for me? Like, I can't imagine the state having so much control over my life.
I would just say, I don't know why you have such trust issues, bro. Big brother, Uncle Sam, whoever it is, that's your family, that's your father, and he knows what's best for you, right? So, towel down, get in line and obey. So unless you're down with that, then yeah, you probably won't have issues with what you said.
Yeah. Zakia says, do you trust the state on mandatory vaccinations? I think that question kind of answers itself. I don't believe in vaccinations or mandatory vaccinations because the state tells me to. So I believe in it because God gave me a brain and I understand science. So if the state concurs with it, it's a Malcolm X thing. I'm for truth no matter who says it. So if the state says something true, it's not going to stop being true to me. But no, I don't trust the state, period. So whether it's on vaccinations or whether it's on anything else, I'm going to verify or double check whatever they say on anything, especially like, listen, on this show, we've talked about COINTELPRO. That one era of history, which I don't think is over, by the way, not with bodies showing up not with bodies showing up in Ferguson's and burnt out cars in a string of a series of deaths that nobody's talked about. I don't think COINTELPRO is over. But even that I can say that should tell you how I feel about the state. Like, am I out here by myself, the one who's like really thinking, the state's still doing some weird stuff to us?
Right. Even if we just look at how they choose to educate the most important group of people for the future of a country are the children. So the fact that if you can't care for the children of your citizens, then what do you care about? Like if they aren't prioritized, if their full well-being and education and health is not prioritized, then then where do I stand? Where does the person down the street stand? Where do you stand? Like, so I think that's a barometer, right? You can tell how people treat and we've talked about this, right? When we were together the other week, how they treat their most vulnerable is an indication, right? And then you look at the history, there's a consistent pattern of not giving a crap about anybody, except the power base that's within them. That's very, insular, so insular that it is a tiny, tiny group of people. And so that history, that pattern, that theme, that trend, that is the most consistent thing about these united in racism states, so.
Yeah, and just to veg you back off of that, and I think Chris answered.
Yeah, we don't piggyback, we veggie back. Tell them, bro.
We don't eat that pork.
You can't even ride a pig?
Nah, man.
You can't even ride it? I know you don't eat it, but you can't even ride one? All right, let's veggie back. Go ahead and veggie back on it, brother.
Veggie back on it. So, yeah, no, just to veggie back off of what you guys were saying, that's the fundamental contradiction of these type of conversations, right? Where we're talking about us and we within the American context. Where in reality, we should be talking about how do we build and survive within the context. And that's why within the Black freedom intellectual genealogy, you find socialism intertwined with it. Number one, like we were pointing out before, it's a socialism represented in an alternative of the system. Also, it united folks, right? You got to recognize most people around the world who are socialists are very serious socialists and have a very deep analysis. It's America that treats it kind of like as a boutique type of situation, right? Mm-hmm. So that also aligns you internationally, right, with the majority of world's people who are of color, right? So we also have to recognize that it's important. And so I was watching on social media the other day, interview with the great psychologist, Dr. Naeem Akbar, right? And he said that we're in a war of two fronts right now, right? Both of them, not one more important than the other, but both equally as important. He says one war is the front against racism, right? That's a constant battle. And that's where like these conversations I think exist in, right? So when we're talking about how we orient ourselves in a state, how are we combating to make a more humane situation out of an inhumane reality, right? Mm-hmm. And then the second front is the restoration of our folks, right? We got to recognize that a lot of confusion, camouflages and mirages were thrown at our folks. And we're talking about over generations now, where we have folks that have been cut off of that kind of like continuity of knowledge of what we've been fighting for, which is freedom for everybody, not just Black folks, right? You got to understand that. That's something that even Europeans or the most American whites don't understand. When Martin King and them was marching in the streets and all that, they weren't fighting just for Black people, they were fighting for all people, right? And so when we address that fundamental issue, when we're attacking the system or trying to address what system we should operate in, we should understand how we can manipulate all sides against each other for our benefit. Mm-hmm. As long as we're fighting on their rules on how the system operates and is defined, we will forever become subservient to that system and those methods and be more of this talking smack on the sidelines instead of being players in the game. And the way you become players in the game is developing an alternative to what other systems that they say are the only ways to go right now, because their systems are inherently unsustainable because it's based off of resource extraction, which is not. It's a finite resource that one day will run out. You will not grow forever. Mm-hmm. And both socialism and capitalism and the European systems that have been developed all are premised on that model. So like that's where I challenge folks to really like recognize that you can use all things. You can use all sides against each other for the benefit of Black folks. And I think that's the way we need to think about when we talk about these systems.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most mature way to look at it in terms of what we do now, because if we felt like we were always being cornered by a devil, the devil would speak every language to you to confuse you. The devil would speak every theology to confuse you. The devil would be I grew up loving Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was like no fixed positions. Like, so he thought of martial arts in terms of you have to know all the versions of it so that if you're fighting a person who does judo, you know what the counterpart to judo is. You know what the counterpart to karate is. This is Sharif's language right now because Sharif's the martial artist here.
Yeah,
right?
I'm thinking of classes that I was taking as a 6-year-old. Like, that's exactly what they would say. Like, we would have to study all the different styles. We're like, we don't even practice that style. We'd be in tears because not only did we have martial arts, we had martial arts theory. Like, that was a class.
Yes,
and I was like, we got to take martial. I just wanted to be out there rumbling. And they were like, no, sit down. It's study time. So we'd be studying martial arts theory. And here's what they believe, right? And so sometimes people would come to us. We had an African martial arts. We're like, and I remember we were at some tournament. Somebody came up to my instructor, Baba Chago, was like, yo, Vitasana. What's that more like? Is that more like Chinese, Kung Fu, or is it karate? Which one is it more like? It's like, you know what? That's like asking a brother, is an African woman more like a Chinese woman or a Japanese woman? An African woman is like an African woman. And this African martial arts is like African martial arts. And this theory, as you're talking about, like, we have to define. So when Amir Suleiman has those rhymes, when he's spitting fire about build and destroy, this is exactly what I'm hearing from you two. We're building something and we have to destroy other things, including our mindsets and the frameworks that we may have come into the struggle operating with, what was handed to us. We have to destroy that and build something anew. And that's why these conversations and communication and power amass. We talk about power like every week, right? Because that's part of Freedom Friday. You have to amass power. You have to organize around power, and you organize people, ideas, and resources, right? And that's how you amass it. Well, without that organization, we're still flailing, grabbing like whatever it is that can get our head a little bit above the water. But that ain't thriving. That's surviving. Well,
and you mentioned you were taught young in life as a young person.
Yeah, man. And I hated martial arts theory class. I'm like, yo,
you hated it.
I hated it at that time, but now I'm just like, yo, those folks in Ntamusasa were geniuses, man. They were absolute geniuses.
It's absolutely one of the things you should be teaching kids is how to be fluid in recognizing styles. Recognizing fighting styles. So Jeet Kune Do, which is Bruce Lee's style, Jeet Kune Do was exactly premised on that, recognizing all the styles and then matching it with a style that would kick its ass. So like looking at your fighter and going, oh, okay, I see what you got. You got Chuck Norris American Karate. Watch this. Watch me knock you out because I know what So it's when you have a person who assigns themselves to one of those styles, like Chuck Norris, for instance. You go Chuck Norris style. Teach your kids to be Chuck Norris. Karate is the best. American karate is the best, right? Well, there's going to be a Bruce Lee out there that's going to whoop his ass, right? That's the same thing with our protest movements. The way I love what Brother Ismail was saying, just in that it's almost like jazz. We have lots of discordant strategies that we have to employ at different times. These notes may not always sound good together, but we can't go for one elegant melody. We just can't do that. So choosing one of these things over the others, capitalism, communism, socialism, blah, blah, you do that. You go ahead and you roll with that. My fear about socialism specifically, the education system is a good example to me. As we are attempting to build Black schools, build Black educational capital, as I call it, to restore the Black educational capital that was lost after 1954. What we are facing are people that want to not privatize education. They want to publicize education, which literally means that the state controls. And who does the state hire to control that system? What do they look like? Where do they come from? What's their educational background? What's their demographic? The system that they want, the one best system that they want to put us in, the socialized educational system that they want to put us in, isn't run by us. It isn't built for us, and it's destroying the minds of Black people. And the very idea that we would build our own schools outside of that it's a crime against socialism, educational socialism. So it's those type of things that give me a problem. Like, I am all for everybody getting healthcare, everybody being taken care of, needs being met. Socialist. I mean, listen, I see no reason why there should be one hungry person. I can't think of a rational reason why there should be one unhoused, hungry person that can't afford insulin. So you got me on that. 100%. I just can't. There is no rationale.
That's the thing. Is it socialism or is that just humanity? Right?
That's
like,
just humanity.
You know, I mean? Is it like, you know?
That's humanity.
Yeah,
your system has failed if there's one unhoused person, one person that's paying $1,000 for insulin. My grandmother, I can remember before she passed away, I didn't know this, but she had been given a drug that allowed her complete pain-free days. Without this drug, the entire left half of her body was in pain all day, every day, in deep, wrenching pain. They gave her a trial drug, and this drug made it so she could live her life every day. And then when she ran out of the free portion of it, the trial, that drug was $1,000 a month, right? So now you're going back to, I know what it tastes like to have pain-free days. You're telling me it's available. It's here. So it's when, you know, a story like that touches home to me, I understand from a socialist perspective. I just don't think that that's right or that should be at all.
Do you mind if I share something? Because this already speaks to the contradiction. Like I'm a public, you know, school employee, and I have been, and I do, you know, I've been involved in a teachers union. I fought for things, right? I also like to think that I haven't just cut off people because they're charter school people. You know what I mean? But at the same time,
you catch heat for that too. They be on your top for that.
They don't have the solution because I see the issues, right? I recognize, like, Chris, everything you said about how public school systems operate is completely correct. But like, I want to go back to the point I was saying about how we need to be multi-tendency right now. That also goes to education. Most of our children go to public school situations. That's a fact. That's a fact that isn't going to change anytime soon. So yes, there are people that should be focused on the restoration, right? And those people occupy homeschooling. There's many examples of that happening right now, like people experimenting with different models, right? And it's just really picking up from where it was left off in the late 70s, early 80s, right? Because folks was talking about that back then too. But then also nowadays, there's still, like, the majority of our children still locked inside oppressive structures that reinforce kind of ignorance onto them. Yes, there is a role that folks need to be in that place fighting against those white supremacist structures. And I get concerned sometimes where we get, you know, like, giving up that battleground. You know what I mean? Be like, well, you know, like, they're just failing our kids. Take your kids out. Be like, yeah, some people will. Like, the parents that are involved will. But the majority of our children will still find themselves in a public school situation. And it's incumbent on us, especially more educated, more, you know, people with more human capital to really put that work in. So like when we're talking about the golden ages of Black education, 1950s down, you got to remember a lot of areas were segregated, but it had all groups, all social economic classes of Black folks in one area that went to the same school. So like, that's why I'm a huge advocate of social economic integration more than racial integration. I can give a damn if my children go to school with a white child. Like, that doesn't mean nothing to me. But I think that they gain more opportunities if they're more in a mixed social economic situation. And the children who are in different social economic status to them also benefit from that interaction, the social capital that's associated with how you're socialized into a system from that social economic position. Now, again, that's not a solution. Right? That's surviving. That's figuring out those crawl spaces and manipulating it for your benefit. So if I can use the benefit of the system giving money to folks to set up charter schools, to set up an Afrocentric charter school for the benefit of our people, take that money, set up that school and keep it moving. I think that sometimes we fall victim though, but still falling back into the definitions of what the system says education actually is. And then we end up falling victim to their values and their measures, even in those other school option settings. Just like public school. And I can go on forever about that. My bad. I didn't mean to.
No. You actually just made, I think, a great point. Yeah. Like, this is a talk show. It's an engagement show. The thing that strikes me about that as really important, just to point out, like everything else we just said, there's no one approach. So the keen dough of education is, it's not about charter schools versus district schools. It's actually just about education, period. So however, like Black people have educated people under trees. They have educated people in church basements. They have educated people in underground railroad houses, safe houses. So obviously our history tells us, like the jazz, you have discordant ways of educating these things. My one challenge
whenever you use the jazz now, you lose me. Like, I don't understand jazz. It's hard for me to enjoy
you
it.
don't understand
But
chess. You don't.
no,
You don't. You don't.
I just
Okay, bro. Black card revoked. Sharif El Mekki is officially with another team now. We have just traded you out.
I'm like, he loves jazz. Like, what about it? Like, and
Bro,
I
I'm
get
gonna
it.
trade you out for Santana. The black coalition would like to trade El Mekki for Santana. What say you, Latino contingent? Anyways, bro. Jute Kendo, then let's not say jazz. Let's say the Jute Kendo in education would tell you all these systems need to be. We need to find a way that there's a solution in independent black schools, charter schools, district schools that have a strong black superintendent. Ones that don't. We have 50% of our kids are in the suburbs now. Get your mind around that. 50% of black children are in the suburbs now. That's a whole different ball game. That's a whole different ball game now. So. Yeah, you on mute, Ishmael. See, COINTELPRO turning your mic off, bro.
Listen, I'm just getting hyped. Paulo Freire said, if you are educated by the oppressor, right, and that's all you know, you dream to be the oppressor. And that's what I get concerned about our children, because like I can tell you, my parents moved me out to the suburbs. So I had an experience in the city and in suburban schools, right? All black schools and majority white schools. And I can tell you right now, I'm still getting over that trauma of going to those type of schools. And when I talk about trauma, I'm talking about some deep psychological, like you're not worthy enough. You need to prove yourself all the time, or you have to conform to what their definitions are so you don't stick out like a sore thumb. All those things are detrimental to our children. So that's one thing I always say to folks. So like if you move out there, I would never say folks don't move out your kids to a better educational situation. But when you're in that situation, understand that your kid's not going to get what they necessarily need in those buildings. Don't get the social economic integration, folks.
Right.
Allow them to advance within our society, but ultimately at the end of the day, they won't get what they fundamentally need spiritually and psychologically in such circumstances. Yeah. So I just need to put that out there.
Being unsafe is in multiple levels. People think about safety. They think, oh, physical safety. Like there's emotional safety, there's intellectual safety, there's cultural, spiritual, and all of those are under attack for the black child and the black brain. And what they internalize, man, if you don't stop muting yourself, if they don't have like the armor and the shield to fit, and even that they're children, right? So even with baby armor on, that being able to process that in the moment with someone, with their loved ones, and then when you think about like parents, how in this system, how much they're working, right? I'll never forget when I was a new teacher, and they gave you this article about how few minutes an individual child has one-on-one interaction with an adult, like actually being heard and having a sustained, conversation for 10 minutes. It rarely happens, even in homes, because of the system, right? It's like, boom, oh, here now with devices on top, layered on top of that. And so how do children process the hostility that they're facing, the hostility that they may not be able to put words to, and will only come out with a sustained engagement and conversation where it gets pulled out, or they say something that makes you like, wait a minute, let me ask this question. How often do they have that time, right? And so that's why I tell people all the time, if I could do 100 Nathamusasas tomorrow, man, it's done. And
okay, but think about that.
But even with 100, how many are left?
Even with 1,000, even with, I mean, there's 100,000 schools in the United States. So build our own, right?
And flood the system with folks with the right mindset that's going to come in and protect and make children safe. Build our own and flood the system at the same time.
Yeah. I mean,
that's why we.
That's the Vetus on the way. I mean, I may not
here's
be the jet cool jump.
In what you just said, though, in what you just said, you are clearly seeing the type of school that you would think about as being optimal, though. As being more optimal than the other. Yeah. Like, it's not like you're saying we should use two strategies, but you're not saying one of them, that they're equal, that both situations are equal, right? So this is where I want to challenge on the majority of our kids are in this system, so therefore we have to have some grace for the system in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if that's exactly what you were saying, but
no, I don't know.
We don't talk about the prison system that way. We don't talk about other oppressive systems that have our people captive in that way. Like, well, they're going to be there anyways, so we might as well just make it as good as we possibly can for
well-meaning guards. Let's trade some well-meaning guards to go in.
And let's be real, we got black prison guards, right? And we need conscious black prison guards. Hell no, we need to get people out of prison. See, I'm an anarchist on this stuff. Like some of y'all are like,
we say the same thing about police.
Some of y'all I'm anarchist about it, right?
Listen, you challenged me before on this with police, like, you know, because there are some folks like, we just need more black police. I'm like, you know what? It's actually been more black cops that pulled the gun on me than white cops when I think about it, right? Like, you know, when I'm staring at the muzzle down the gun, there was a black cop, there was a black female cop, and there were white cops. Like, it was. The blue was there, yes. Like, and they rock solid on standing with that. So,
well, let me ask y'all about this. Though,
just feels different than that.
Yeah, it feels different because you've been like all the romantic things about schools that we've been taught. School is the one enterprise in the country that actually doesn't do what it's supposed to do in this one way. You go through 13 years of public schooling, and never once does it teach you about the history of public schooling. Never once does it tell you about the construction of its own system. While you're in the system learning about the world, it does not teach you about how that person who's teaching became your teacher, where they came from, what they learned, how they learned it, what's the history of that person, what's their demographic, why are they so different than you? Why are they a college-educated middle-class group of people who are actually lording over people who have no option of actually becoming college-educated with a pension like they are? And oh, by the way, no one ever teaches you that their pension is literally vested in private prisons and child detention centers either. That's a little detail that we leave out as we have people going through. But this is what I'll say, and y'all can fight me on this. Let's fight. Fight Club. Boom. Let's do this. There are more of those black cop mentality teachers than there are Ismails and El Mekis in teaching, in black teaching. So yes, majority of our kids are in those schools. And yes, there are some conscious teachers, but I'm guaranteeing y'all are outnumbered. Y'all are even when the teacher is black in places like Chicago and Detroit and other places. I bet you the El Mekis and Ismails are outnumbered.
I hate you.
It's true. I mean, like, it's true. You know, like I think my mother passed away 7 years ago, right? And I would always tell my students this, right? She died in debt with bad credit, not owning anything. I am not here to reinforce and socialize you into a system that really you aren't supposed, you know, you're a disposable element in, right? I would literally be honest with the students. And it's not saying that you are, but it's saying that if you believe that to be true about yourself, you already lost that game before you even know that you had to shoot the ball to begin with, right? So like when we're talking about like the reality where we got a lot of Negro-peans, if we do get more black teachers,
here we go.
It's true. I mean, it is true, unfortunately, right? Because they believe in it. They believe in it, right? Unfortunately, like I was saying, like, I don't believe in this. So when we have a bunch of people believing it and then reinforcing that with our kids, I mean, we do that a tad little bit too. Because regardless of anything, we're still like submerged. Our consciousness is still somewhat submerged within the structure of the system. And I'm not saying just let it be, and that's always what we're going to have to deal with. Like your prison example, I'm slightly an anarchist in that regard too. I'm an intercommunalistic anarchist, and I guess that's where we differ a little bit.
Oh no, we don't differ. Tell me more about this.
Well, that's what Huey talked about towards the end, right?
Yeah, okay.
It's like, you know, socialism on a tribal level. Take it back to the indigenous type style. Are we near there? Is that going to happen? No, but I think it's a much more sustainable model. I think it's much more humane and also much more, better for children to be socialized in such circumstances. Now, within this system, as we operate with the schools, I definitely agree, man. It is a precarious situation. Tons of structures of oppression are reinforced, and the kids are literally associating learning with the school experience that they have before they even understand what that even means. You understand? So they conflate learning with school. And that's not the same thing. And that's one thing we always had. I always went out my way to dislodge. Like when you go into the cafeteria for a half an hour lunch and that John feels like it went for like 2 minutes, just know it felt like 2 minutes because you were intellectually engaged with somebody. You might have been talking about some nonsense, but you were intellectually engaged with someone, learning something, making sense, boxing it, put it, you know what I mean? So that's what we need to start breaking the mold in school. Now, how do we do that? Switching the guards. I mean, like that really hurt me. You touched my soul a little bit by saying that. But
that's why Cherie said, "I hate you."
I mean, it's true though. I mean, it's an ugly reality, and I would love to say that even the folks who I would consider somewhat woke, I would say that they're large numbers, but there are a lot of semi folks who like, you know, and there's a certain level of understanding that certain folks can get to, unfortunately, that I found, where it's like, it's all good that you understand privilege and white supremacy and everything. But when it comes to your daily practice, the way you interact with people, the choices and decisions about who you interact with in your life, outside, inside, everywhere, that's the determining factor. And a lot of folks like to divorce their life. And that goes to this westernized view of the individual, right? Oh, it's just me. I'm nice to people. I do well. Da, da, da. Yeah, but you're still reinforcing the system by the way you exist and the way and the ideas in which you allowed to go by without challenging, right? So when we have our kids in these wasting away, unfortunately, a lot of situations in these schools, right? We also have to be able to be like, all right, I'm going to kick in the door, wave in the 4-4, and I'm not going to be apologetic. I'm not going to be nice. I'm going to make sure that I speak truth to the folks that are coming up under me, train my replacements to go in there and dismantle it at the same time as uplifting education, as what education actually is, something that nourishes the soul and the spirit, the mind, you know, everything. And as soon as we have to shift from that mold that it's just somewhere where we go off and check the box, and that education is our life, and what do we put in our life determine where we're going to be in our life. And unfortunately, in this system, we don't really have too much control over that. And until we do, man, I don't know what way to go. I would say that I agree with you on those aspects. And I would also say that I'm also an advocate of teacher unions, which is
Jesus. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord.
Well, just like you don't trust the state, I don't trust the boss. You know what I mean? But then ultimately,
teachers unions are part of the boss.
Exactly. Too many teachers use the union to protect crappy teachers and don't use it to challenge the system. See, when I was a teacher, like up until last February, I used the system to challenge the system. So much so that I got written up for insubordination twice. Insubordination. You know what I mean? But none of it stuck. But the point is what we're focusing and what we use these levers of power for, because the union could potentially be used as a tool for the benefit of our children if the means of that power was overtaken. Just as much as people advocate Black capitalism, as much as people advocate Black people running for government, right? Though that's the same frame of model that can be applied to any lever of power within this society. Now, ultimately, is that the solution? I would say no.
I mean, bro, you stung me with that one, because I think like teachers unions, I can't see bigger proof of why I'm not a socialist than teachers unions. They talk a good game about education's the public good and the kids our schools deserve and all that stuff. Teachers unions are a prophylactic for the system. They are not an antithesis or an antagonist within the system. They are actually a prophylactic for it. If you look at the sum total of their $500 million of political activity that they do every year, it's actually they're fighting for the system, not kids. That's why they say save our public schools, not save our students. That's why they say like fund our schools. They don't say fund our students. That's why they say like, you're trying to destroy the system and you're taking money. They don't say you're taking students. They say you're taking money, like when students leave the system. It's because they're system centric, because they are parasitic to the system. So in any history of slavery or oppression, you always found ancillary parasitic actors that lived on the system no matter what they did. And that's what teachers unions are to the education system. They are cartels within that benefit every day. Now, there was a time, I'm just gonna be real, in history where there were Black teachers unions, for instance, before they merged with the NEA and the AFT. And before they merged and were taken over and lost all their power, exactly the way that the Black teachers union leaders warned was gonna happen, before they lost all their power and they became just kind of like mistresses to teachers unions by being integrated into them, maybe there was a difference. Not even maybe, there absolutely was a difference. Vanessa Siddle Walker tells us that they had power. Power to determine curriculum, pedagogy, institutional knowledge or whatnot, that they lost, just like their leaders told them they were going to lose it when they merged with the white teachers unions.
Yeah, exactly. And those are lessons that we need to learn as we maneuver within this system, right? But like my enemy's enemy at times can be my friend. And, when it comes to many of these things, that's where Derek Bell, when he talked about interest alignment, right? Interest convergence, right? There's interest convergence at times. As much as how you describe kind of like the parasitic nature of teachers union, and the majority of teachers union, it's like 80% white women, which by itself, by definition, is problematic. I'm not negating that. But at the same time, their interests converge with our interests at times when it comes to the education of our children. And if leveraged correctly, it could be towards our benefit, as much as the sleaziness that's involved with, government funders when they fund alternative, Black education programs. Like when you look at some, like if you think of like the Walton family, right, and some of the education initiatives that they do that are in contrary and alternative. I'm not saying don't go get that Walton money. Black folks, go get that Walton money and educate our children.
All of it.
Do that.
All of it.
I'm not purist when it comes to that.
No, all of it, because Randy Weingarten is not giving us any money. But
they're trash too, right? We got to recognize that. And they're not our friends either.
How are they trash? Because see, this is the capitalist socialist thing here. Tell me how they're trash. Let's put this out there.
They're the biggest private employer in the United States, and almost majority of their workforce has to require food stamps in order to feed their family because they don't make enough underneath the biggest private employer in the United States. They also drive down their prices by driving down the suppliers' prices by saying we won't sell your product and we'll go to your competitor if you don't lower your prices to leverage more cheaper prices when they sell it. So they engage in some of the most exploitative, on the edge legal practices in the American workforce type of scenario.
So this, for me right here, this would make a perfect lesson. Like to have young people dissect this thing that you just said, right? Like to say, I'm not going to tell you what to think or how to think. What I'm going to say is we're going to put this on the table. We're going to bring in 3 speakers. And then go look at this exact same situation, because everything you just said, I've heard it before, and I have a counter argument to it because I'm a capitalist, right? So I have a counter argument to it or whatnot. Like I don't think employing people, when you just said biggest employer, but they still require food stamps. I think we could unpack that in a classroom. Kids could listen to different sides of that and see what side they come out on. Even things like the living wage. There'd be a way to teach, kids about, living wage raises all boats, except for in some cities, when you pass a living wage initiative, the first people to lose their jobs are people of color, and the people they get replaced with are white people that wouldn't have taken those jobs previous to getting that higher wage. And that when we pass those laws, there's no equity or equity monitoring in the law. So we pass that, like a living wage or whatever, but we don't put an equity provision that says, but thou shalt track who's getting the jobs after this, right? So that we know that we're not replacing a bunch of people of color with white folks. But kids should learn this from all these perspectives. We should have them. We should do the Jute Kingdom. We should bring in Ismail and me. I don't know what you're gonna do, El Becky, because you don't even know about jazz, bruh. So we're gonna leave you out of the classroom. We don't need that type of problem with our kids. But we need them engaging in these different ideologies rather than pushing one on them and expecting them to be ready for the world.
Yeah. I would just say that there's interest for our children not to be educated, and I think they have many faces and many orientations. Some of them call themselves socialists, some of them call themselves capitalists. And so when I think of that, that's the points that you're making about why teacher unions are toxic, and the point you just made about learning these different type of things is the lesson that we need to learn. At the end of the day, these things are not towards our benefit systemically. The system does not operate like that. We can force their hand. We can manipulate situations when the time is opportune. We can use the enemy's enemy towards our benefit. But we need to think like that. And less I would never when it comes to this funding type stuff, I recognize that they're also parasitic, because the way our system's set up, like Martin King said, we got rugged individualism for the poor and socialism for the rich. So we have a system that benefits the top, and they pay themselves over and over. You know what I mean? I just think about the housing crisis where Black folks got screwed out. All the wealth gained under Clinton was wiped out in 2008 when the housing bubble popped, right? And then who benefited? Who got paid off by the government and received all those trillions of dollars of government funds? It was multi-million-dollar businesses, places like Yeah, so like these people are
Okay, see, this is where, boy, this class would go off the rails if we had this class. Listen, bro, let me respond to this with a little bit of reality about socialism. The instruments that caused the loss of that wealth was pushed by a handful of left-wing activist groups that pushed the instruments that actually gave us balloon payments and gave us these ridiculous loans that Black people were under, and steered us to some loans that made some left-wing people wealthy. And folks should look this up. The couple that invented the ARM loan, for instance, the one instrument that wiped out more Black wealth than any, is one of the most major funders in the United States of the progressive movement. Things like Acorn and others pushed that and pushed Black people into these faulty instruments that people did make money off of. Yeah. And that money is still being used today to fund things like, I want to say, ProPublica and a nation of Center for Education Democracy, all these progressive groups. As they're beating up like Waltons and whatnot, blah, blah, we got to talk about the Democracy Alliance. We have to talk about the political money movement. We have to talk about $100 million going into Black Lives Matter and nobody being able to find it or where it went or where it came from and for what purpose, right? Like, we got to teach our kids all sides of this. Like, we can stay on this unionized, Amazon and Waltons are bad because basically only because we want them to be unionized. That's the only reason why they're a target for that, as they're employing more Black people in management and in six figures than almost any other institution in the world. But we don't look at it when it's progressives actually driving some of these things. Like, we should have never had our Black wealth in those faulty instruments in the first place, but we were steered into them. Somebody actually literally made money steering us into bad mortgages that came due, kicked our ass at some point. Now, that's not to say I'm going to stick with you though and say yes on the other side too. Anytime there's a bailout in the United States, guess who's front line in that bailout? Yeah. Right?
The socialists.
No. Obama did take care of everybody except for Ford Motor Company. Let's remember all the auto industries, for instance, got that big bailout money and then stopped producing cars in the United States, right? Like
banks too, right? That's what I mean. But they become socialists at that point, right? Like, then they're like, absolutely right. Absolutely, give this to us, give this to us,
Absolutely right.
And then any other time. But I think this is why, people like Michael Kort says, hey, I'm a pragmatic revolutionary, because there's rarely you're going to find just the purest form until we build our own, right? And so there's a whole lot of interest convergence, which doesn't always feel good. Like, sometimes it doesn't feel good. I remember one revolutionary talked about there was some interest convergence. He said it feels like swallowing poison. Like it was like tearing up inside, and it was the most practical, pragmatic, revolutionary thing he could do at that moment. And so I think that happens a lot, and I think that adds on to the racial stress we feel, often as we're maneuvering so many different spaces. But I think this is why, the flag that has to fly, in our minds and in our actions is the love for our community and how we're doing it. We're not going to do it perfectly. We're not going to get it right. But like the intention, Malcolm said, like, you know what? I welcome all the criticism, but the one thing they'll be able to say is I was sincere in my commitment to my community. At the end of the day, if that's on my eulogy, that I was sincere to my community and my work efforts, they were like, yeah, he made a ton of mistakes, but his sincerity brought him. And you know what? And there wasn't harm. Like, I wasn't harming people. I may not have gotten it always right, but I wasn't out there harming people. Like, that's I think, I love that, part of the way forward.
Yeah, and Chris, I feel like you've proven the point I was trying to make the whole time about like John Henrik Clarke said, we have no friends. If you want to see your friend, look in the mirror. So like this continuous reliance on these other folks to come and help us, man, they're only helping us for their interests. We need to get over this idea that some benevolence is actually behind that money or interest beyond their own pocketbook.
Yeah.
Because that's not their value system, man. Like, we know their value system. History teaches us their value system. And we have to be honest with ourselves about what that means. We need to stop being nice people so much to the way they operate, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's always been to our detriment. We've been too nice believing that, oh no, there's no way they would do that. No way they would elect Trump. There's no way they would elect Bush. Come on, man. You know, and I'm young, relatively speaking. I am turned 40.
Bro.
But
Listen,
you know, how many times we tell ourselves this?
That ain't relatively. That's still young. That's young as hell. I'll put it this way.
Like, relatively, like, nah, you're young.
Relatively, yeah. Relative to what?
No permanent friends, no
know?
permanent enemies, right?
Yeah.
Permanent interest is the liberation of our people. So
Exactly.
that's
Well,
the work.
I want to do a
day.
round on final words. Get y'all final word on this thing around socialism and black people. Black people, we ain't socialist, are we? That kind of was the question we started with, but I think we went some places that kind of answers that question. But what's your final take on our relationship with socialism?
Well, I can go first.
You will start with you, El Mekki.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, I think, you know, for me, I'm less concerned about the label. There's a picture at a protest that we were at a long time ago as children. I remember the sign that my little brother had made and was holding up was neither east nor west. It was saying neither, you know, and at that time it was the two great superpowers. And it seemed like the world was running to decide which side of the wall they were going to be on, whether they were in Germany or whether they were in Asia, Africa, or the Americas. And, you know, and I don't remember the protests that we were attending, but I think about that sometimes when I run across that picture, neither east nor west. And you can replace east and west to whatever ideology that you want, because at the end of the day, we have to create our own systems, our own ways to support our communities, our own ways of, you know, ideological frameworks. But at the end of the day, you know, what's the most humane way to interact, to be a part of, to live, educate, and work in community of with others. So neither east nor west is still my motto.
To the east, my brother. To the east, my brother. I'm gonna go second because I want to give our guest the last word on this question. So here's my take on it. I think what we have said today actually that resonates with me the most is no fixed position, no one style, no way of doing things. The moment that you join one team of intellectual thought, that team will find a way to oppress your ass. That's what we've learned from history. I don't care whether it's socialist, communist, capitalist, noist, anarchist, whatever. When other people are in control, especially globally speaking, anti-blackness can set into any system, any group of philosophical thought, political thought, and systems. So the one thing you want to be on the outlook for is anti-blackness. Because it is ancient now at this point. It's like long-standing, and it will embed itself in any country. Some of these European socialist nations that we want to hold up and act like they're the end all be all have some very serious race problems, some very serious immigration problems. So watch out for that. That's all I'm saying. Now, all things being considered equal, this is where this is why I put this hat on. Like, not a socialist is. Out of all the different political thought systems, if your thought system requires me to turn over my children to the state, my precious commodities to the state, my labor to the state, any of my things that I'm needing to build my freedom, then we're going to have a problem with your system. So I don't understand how Black people can be free without Black enterprise, without owning the means of production, without owning the means of knowledge production, of the production that meets our needs, our basic needs, the things that we need most, our products. As long as we don't have that, as long as we don't have capital in a world that respects capital, we will be without power. So there is no pathway to power with us turning over our most precious things to socialized systems without any ability to have Black hospitals, Black schools, Black barbershops, Black restaurants, Black banks, Black lending instruments that we devise for ourselves, for our own people. Like in some cultures, the lending instruments are highly specialized. You can't pay interest in some cultures. So they have banks that specialize in that, right? So I can't be a socialist. I'm sorry. I can't join a team. I believe in freedom. I believe in freedom and free enterprise, and I want a piece of land where people leave me the hell alone and don't tell me what to do. And that might include some of y'all, just to be very honest with you too. So that's my final word on socialism. No, Black people are not socialists. We have had, like jazz, we have played certain socialist songs at certain times, and that's the right thing to do. But I don't think it's the soundtrack of our life. Brother Ishmael.
Yeah. No, I was going to co-sign this idea. That's why I would consider myself explicitly not a socialist, right? Of course, like there's certain aspects of socialism that I co-sign, like universal healthcare, things like that, public school system, but then ultimately at the same time, I recognize the system that we are operating under. And so therefore, like I agree with you on that Black people aren't always, aren't socialists. Any title or tag applied and defined by a Eurocentric system onto Black people, it shouldn't necessarily stick unless Black people are making that definition up themselves in order to get free. And I think whatever orientation folks choose to undertake, right, there should be some Black socialists out there, right? There should be other folks out there advocating and agitating from many different angles. But I think we get fundamentally confused when we confuse what the real enemy or the real issue is. The issue has always been and will be, for our children's lifetime and their children's lifetime, probably the system of white supremacy and the antecedents that come from it, right? All the constructs of what reality is based upon and what we should value and why we should value it. We have to fundamentally come to be honest about what those things mean to us. Because right now, we might agree on some things, but ultimately folks haven't been able to get to the same page to understand, this isn't good for us, that this system is fundamentally wicked. And ultimately, when we're fighting for anything, it's fighting for those crawl spaces so our children can survive and thrive as much as possible to potentially come with an alternative structure, an alternative idea, right? But right now, we're losing, man. We're paddling and we ain't doing well. And we got to be honest about that. And we also got to be honest, this conversation right here, I need the students that I've taught in Kensington and Germantown over the 12 years I taught, I need those kids to be in these conversations. And we had those conversations in my class, but when I see them out in the street, some of them 10 years later, almost, over 30 years old, they talk about how much they appreciate my class. And I ask, oh, so what you up to? And it's they're ashamed to tell me that they're not actively involved in any type of movement. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But that speaks to, there's a desire of our children. They know something's fundamentally wrong, except we got to be honest. The generation, not really us, but the generation right before us kind of dropped the ball. They believe that they can integrate into a burning house. And then we found ourselves in this burning house, and all folks is telling us is pull up our pants. And look, Martin King had a dream. And then Barack Obama's president, right? And it's there's nothing wrong. Everything's equal now, right? And so that sense of socialism, of fairness and everything should be equal, that has a fundamental place in fighting against the structures and the oppression that people fight. It's not a solution, but it has a place, as much as Black capitalism has a place, as long as it's not just reinforcing the structure that exists. So
I love it. Truth bomb. I think this should be a class for our young people.
I agree.
I think this exact thing that we talked about today. I'm gonna end with violence. Just by saying this, thank you everybody who came and watched today and put amazing comments in the comments. Y'all was really going off in there. I love it when people disagree with me, because that's what this is about. It's about agreement, disagreement, but being able to have the conversation. I think our young people should be able to have these conversations. They should be made to be mentally nimble, that they don't buy anything. They don't buy it just because you're selling it. They buy it because they have pulled it through a filter of critical thinking, and they've come out the other end with what they think about it. So want to present all sides. But on this one point,
thinking is being banned across the country.
It is being banned across the country. They are for again, another problem with socialism and relying on the state is if white people woke up tomorrow and decided that all black people should wear orange jumpsuits, they would have the numerical power within the system to make that happen. If black people woke up the next day and said, we think all white people should wear purple hats, they would have no power to enforce that and make it happen. So one white kid being uncomfortable in the classroom can move entire states to go up to the state house and pass laws to outlaw entire schools of thought because they don't want their kids. But we don't have commensurate power within the same system to be able to enforce that for our children, right?
You just made a succinct argument against the idea of reverse racism right there. I hope you know that. There's no such thing as that. So
there's no such thing as there's only power.
Power, yeah.
If you have the power to wake up one day and decide, I think this whole thing should change. Let's go write a law. Let's make it happen. Let's get our governors and everybody working on this. And by next week, we'll have a law that says you can't teach a certain theory within school.
We're going to ban Ruby Bridges' story.
We're going to ban Ruby. And now Ruth Bader
She's
Ginsburg.
So offensive. She's so offensive.
But on this other point, I just want to say this one last thing for Brother Ismail, because we're going to continue this again. We're going to come back and have another conversation. This thing about like employers who have employees that qualify for food stamps or government assistance. I want to tell you that the number one employer in the country is the federal government and the state governments and government, period. And government has the largest number of people working for them that qualify for government assistance, just so people know this. So there is no go to socialism because capitalism is so bad that it treats its workers so bad. In fact, there are states where teachers qualify for government assistance. Teachers qualify for
non-unionized teachers, mind you, non-unionized teachers.
There are states where unionized. I live in a unionized state. The starting salary in the state that I live in is terrible. I can't imagine anybody living on it. Well, I mean, you got the 3 months off in the summer, but maybe that's why so many of them first year and second year teachers work another job, like work summer programs or take other jobs in the summer, is because it gives them an opportunity to gain more money, like to earn more money. But I mean, I want to say it's like in some states, $28K, right? Something like that, starting first year teacher with student loans, by the way, just so you know. Now, who's your employer when you're making that much amount of money? Who's your daddy? Anyways, I told you I was going to choose violence at the end. Thank you all for watching. This has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. But hopefully you're freer at the end of this hour that you were when we began.
Jimenez, he's incorrigible. That's all I can say. He's incorrigible.
Listen, if you're not mixing it up and starting trouble, what are you doing with your mornings? So I appreciate you, brothers, so much. I do appreciate y'all for having this time with us this morning.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Everybody listening and watching, if you want to find any of these brothers, tell them how they can find you, Ismail.
You can find me Instagram at ishx19 and
ISHX.
ISHX19, and then on Twitter teacher ISHX, teacher ishx. So
wow. All right. So y'all got all the platforms now. You got different ways to get me. You know how to reach El Mekki or me, but don't reach El Mekki. He don't know about jazz. So just reach out to one of the rest of us. Have a great day, everybody. Have a great weekend. Be blessed. Do your very best to protect the most important thing that we have in our community, which is the intellectual development of our boys and girls. That is the most precious thing. There's nothing more powerful in our fight for our struggle for freedom than the Black mind. Take care of it. Take care of the Black mind. We'll see you guys all